Snow had fallen through the night, fine as sifted flour, covering the empty prairie in a silence too heavy for mourning. The world seemed buried, fences swallowed, wagon tracks vanished, the small house crouched like a wounded animal beneath the weight. Inside, Mary Calloway sat by the stove that had gone cold some time before dawn. Her fingers were stiff and pale as bone where they clutched her youngest child to her chest. The child did not stir. She could feel the shallow rhythm of his breath against her ribs, fragile as a moth's wing. The other children slept on the floor near the ashes, their faces shadowed, lips blue. They had eaten the last of the cornmeal 2 nights ago. The water bucket was frozen through, a single pale stone. Mary had broken it with the heel of her boot yesterday, and the sound had carried like glass, shattering across the emptiness outside. Now, even that seemed too loud. Only the wind moved slow, low, whispering against the boards as if the land itself pitied them. She rose, every joint aching, and went to the door. The latch stuck. Frost had sealed it. She pressed until it cracked open, and the cold came in like a punishment. The yard was ghost white, the barn little more than a dark blur through the veil of snow. The mare was gone. Sometime in the night, the animal must have broken through the fence in search of grass buried miles away. The thought did not bring anger, only a dull resignation that settled deeper in her bones. Everything that could leave had left. Her husband had been the first, 6 months back, carried off by fever and a doctor who arrived 2 days too late. Then the neighbors, one by one, taken by the drought, by debt, by despair. Now the horse. She was the last stubborn root in a field of dust. She wrapped a torn shawl around her shoulders and stepped out into the snow. The air bit her skin raw, but she moved anyway toward the barn. Each step cracked like gunfire in the stillness. Inside, the stalls were empty, except for the cow's carcass frozen, stiff, her eyes clouded to marble. Mary turned away, pressing her knuckles to her mouth. For a long time, she could hear nothing but the wind threading through the boards and the small whimper of her own breath. She thought of her husband's grave beneath the cottonwood, the way the earth had frozen before they could dig deep enough. She had wept not because he was gone, but because she had to stop digging while his shoulder still showed. The ground had hardened around him, sealing him in that half-finished hole, like an unanswered prayer. Sometimes she dreamed he called to her from beneath it, voice muffled, telling her to go west to follow the river until she found something green. But where could she go with 4 children and no horse? When she returned to the cabin, her eldest, Clara, had woken. The girl was thin, her eyes too old for 12. She sat by the stove, rubbing her arms for warmth. "Ma," she said softly, "the baby's crying." Mary nodded. She could not produce milk anymore, only the hollow ache where it used to be. She took the child anyway, whispering nonsense, her voice trembling in the quiet. By mid-morning, the snow brightened, a sharp glare off the whiteness. She thought she saw movement beyond the ridge, something dark against the horizon. For a long while she stared, wondering if it was only another trick of hunger. Then the shape grew clearer. A horse, slow and deliberate, with a rider hunched low against the wind. Her heart kicked once, painfully. A traveler this far from the main road was a rarity in winter. She stepped outside again, shawl whipping in the gusts. When the horse drew near, she saw a man broad-shouldered, beard thick with frost, eyes narrowed against the glare. He reined in a few paces from her, studied the house, the children's faces peering from the window. "You the widow Calloway?" His voice was rough, but not unkind. She hesitated, then nodded. The name still felt foreign to her, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. He swung down from the horse, joints creaking like old wood, and reached for the saddlebag. "Name's Thomas Hale," he said. "Ranch up north, 10 miles or so. Saw the smoke a week ago, thought I'd check if anyone's still here." "There's no smoke now," she said quietly. He gave a small nod, eyes drifting to the roof where icicles hung like teeth. "I see that." He opened the bag and pulled out a tin wrapped in cloth. The smell that came from it made her knees weaken. Beans, salt pork, something real. He handed it to her wordlessly. For a long moment she only stared, afraid it was a dream. Then she took it, fingers trembling, and managed to whisper, "You should keep it. Roads are long." He shook his head. "Had my share already. This one's for you." Behind her, the children watched, silent, their eyes wide. She turned, tears burning her throat, and carried the tin inside as if it were holy. When she set it by the fire, the children crowded close. The steam rose, carrying a smell that filled the small room with memory of better days, of laughter she could barely recall. Outside, the wind had eased. The sun struggled through a break in the clouds, pale and cold, but there all the same. She felt it on her face, and for the first time in months, it did not hurt. The meal was gone quickly, though she had forced herself to eat last. The children licked the tin clean, scraping every trace of salt and grease with their fingers. Thomas Hale had stood at the doorway, hat in his hands, eyes lowered not out of shame but respect, as though witnessing something sacred. When they were done, he spoke quietly. "You'll not last another week out here," he said, "not with the snow still coming." Mary's voice, when it came, was small but steady. "It's our home." He looked around the dim one-room cabin, the sagging rafters, the stove half buried in ash, the wet footprints melting on the floor. "It's a coffin," he said simply. Something inside her bristled at the bluntness, yet she knew he was right. The wind outside whined like a wounded thing, testing the cracks in the walls. He shifted his weight, glancing at the sleeping children. "I could take you to my place," he said. "There's room enough for a few souls, though it's no palace. You could work some for your keep." She studied him then, his coat patched and threadbare, his hands scarred from rope and weather, the lines around his eyes carved deep by solitude. He was not a young man, perhaps 35, maybe 40. There was something watchful in him, like a man who had seen too much of both kindness and cruelty to trust either fully. "I've got 4 children," she said, as though it were a warning. "I can count," he replied. Silence hung between them. The fire sputtered and died. Outside, the light had begun to fade again, turning the snow to iron. He moved toward the door. "Think on it. I'll come back in the morning." But she did not sleep that night. The wind screamed across the prairie, shaking the cabin like a beast trying to claw its way in. She held the baby tight, her mind circling the man's offer. Pride fought with fear, and both lost to the deeper ache of hunger. By dawn, the decision had already been made inside her, though she did not want to name it. When the knock came, she was already dressed. The children stood behind her, wrapped in blankets. Thomas waited outside, his horse steaming in the cold. "You ready?" he asked simply. She nodded. He lifted the youngest into his arms, gentle as a man handling something too fragile for this world. Then he helped the others mount behind him, the horse burdened but steady. Mary walked. She would not ride while her children went hungry. Her feet could bear what their stomachs could not. The journey north was a blur of white and wind. Her legs burned, and more than once Thomas offered her the saddle, but she refused. He said nothing, only slowed his pace. When at last the land began to slope upward, and a cluster of dark pines appeared through the storm, she nearly wept. His ranch was a rough thing, 2 barns, a low house built of logs and stubbornness, fences leaning from years of hard wind. Smoke rose from the chimney, the smell of wood and something faintly sweet. He led them inside. Warmth hit her like a blow. The room was plain, a table scarred by knives, shelves lined with jars, a rifle above the hearth. Still, it was clean. A woman's touch lingered in the way the curtains had been mended, the dishes stacked neat. "You had a wife," she said softly, not as a question. He nodded. "Long time gone. Fever took her." She looked around again, understanding then the stillness of the place, not empty, but waiting. The children huddled near the fire while Thomas filled bowls from a pot that had been simmering since dawn. The smell of stew beef, onion, maybe carrot, rose rich and thick. Mary's stomach twisted with both hunger and shame. She tried to protest, but he cut her off with a look that brooked no argument. "Eat first," he said. "Talk later." That night, the children slept in real warmth for the first time in months. Mary sat by the window, staring out at the faint moonlight on the snow. Thomas sat across from her, sharpening a knife with slow, even strokes. "You plan on heading back come spring?" he asked without looking up. She hesitated. "There's nothing to go back to." He nodded once, the sound of the blade steady against the stone. "Then maybe you stay. Plenty of work here. Stock to feed, fences to mend. Could use another pair of hands." She studied him, searching for something hidden beneath the plainness of his words. "You'd trust a stranger in your home?" He met her eyes then, the steel glint of the knife catching the firelight. "You're not a stranger anymore." Something in her chest shifted, a small warmth unfurling where despair had lived too long. She turned back to the window, to the wide, white world beyond. For the first time in a long while, the snow did not seem cruel. It was simply there, cold, endless, and somehow survivable. Days passed like breath through frost, slow, visible, and easily broken. Mary rose before dawn, moving through the house with quiet efficiency. She fed the fire, fetched water, helped Thomas with the animals. Her hands cracked from cold and work, yet she found a strange comfort in the ache. It was proof that she was still here, still capable of shaping something beyond sorrow. The ranch was harsh, but it was alive. Cattle lowed in the distance, their voices muffled by snow. The barn smelled of hay and iron, and the faint sweetness of molasses. The children began to laugh again softly at first, uncertain, as if afraid the sound would summon misfortune. Thomas never said much, but she saw how he watched them, the corners of his mouth twitching in what might have been a smile. He had a way of moving through the world that felt deliberate, as though each motion was chosen rather than spent. He worked without complaint, splitting wood until his shoulders glistened with sweat even in the freezing air. Mary often caught herself staring at the steadiness of his hands, at the quiet rhythm of his labor. When he noticed, he only tipped his hat and returned to his work, leaving her both flustered and oddly grateful. One evening, as the light drained from the plains, she found him by the fence line, mending a break where the wind had torn through. The sun bled low over the horizon, a red wound closing against the dark. "You never told me why you stayed out here," she said, handing him a length of wire. He twisted it tight before answering. "My father built this place. Died before I could tell him I'd rather work the land than sell it. Guess I stayed to prove something to him, to myself, maybe to no one at all." She studied him in the fading light. "You believe in ghosts?" He gave a small, wry smile. "I believe some things don't die easy." She thought of her husband's grave, the unfinished mound of earth. "Some things never leave at all," she murmured. The silence that followed was not empty. It held the hum of the wind, the slow creak of wood, and something tender. Beneath it all, a recognition of loss shared, if not spoken. Winter bled into the faintest hint of spring. The snow began to soften, turning the ground to mud. The children followed Thomas out to the fields, their laughter echoing across the thaw. He showed Clara how to saddle a horse, guided her hand with patience that surprised Mary. The younger ones chased chickens, their boots sinking deep with each step. It was during one of these mornings that Mary caught herself humming a tune she could not remember learning, something her mother might have sung long ago. The sound startled her. Thomas looked up from his work and grinned, the expression so unguarded it nearly broke her. "You've got music in you still," he said. She flushed, turning away. "It's foolishness." He shook his head. "It's life. Folk forget the two are the same thing." That night she found herself unable to sleep. The house was quiet except for the soft breathing of her children. She rose and stepped outside. The air smelled of thawing soil and cedar smoke. Above her, the stars burned bright and cold. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt the world widen rather than close. Thomas was sitting on the porch, coat draped over his shoulders. "Couldn't rest either?" he asked. She shook her head. "Too quiet." "After hunger, quiet feels strange," he said. "Takes a while to trust it." She sat beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. The distance between them was small but charged, like the breath before confession. He spoke again, voice low. "You've got strength, Mary Calloway, more than most men I've known." Her eyes stung at the sound of her full name. It had been months since anyone had spoken it aloud. "Strength don't mean much when the world's hungry," she said. "It means everything," he replied. The words hung in the cold, trembling between belief and something deeper. She looked at him then, really looked the tired kindness in his eyes, the stubborn hope that refused to die. She felt a warmth that frightened her, not because it was wrong, but because it was real. When she turned away, he did not press her. They sat until dawn smeared the sky with pale light. The prairie stretched wide before them, wounded and wild and waiting. And though she did not say it aloud, Mary understood. Survival had changed her. But kindness, quiet, steady, unearned, was what would save her. Spring came slow that year, as if the land itself were testing those who dared to hope. The snow retreated inch by inch, leaving behind ruts and puddles that swallowed boots whole. Buds trembled on the cottonwoods, and the air began to smell faintly of wet grass and smoke. Life crept back in, cautious but determined, like someone returning to a house long abandoned. Mary worked beside Thomas from dawn to dusk. Together they cleared the debris winter had left, patched fences, sowed seed. Her hands grew strong again, her back straightened with the rhythm of work. There were nights she fell into bed without memory of lying down, waking only when the sun brushed her face through the thin curtain. The children thrived under the new order of days. Clara learned to churn butter, to measure grain, to catch rainwater in barrels. The younger ones built forts of straw behind the barn, returning with hair full of dust and laughter that carried all the way to the fields. Mary sometimes paused mid-task just to listen. That sound unburdened joy was rarer than gold in this country. Thomas never spoke of charity. Whatever arrangement existed between them was unspoken, stitched together from shared labor and the quiet understanding of need. Some evenings he read aloud from a weathered Bible, his voice low and rough. Other nights he whittled small toys for the children while Mary mended clothes by the fire. These were the hours when silence felt full rather than empty. Yet beneath the calm, something uncertain stirred. Mary felt it in the way Thomas lingered near the doorway when she brushed past him, or how his voice softened when he said her name. It frightened her, the tenderness of it, the possibility. She had buried her heart with her husband beneath the cottonwood. To love again seemed a betrayal of both the dead and the woman she had been. One afternoon, as they hauled fence posts across the south pasture, she slipped in the mud. Before she could fall, Thomas caught her by the arm. For a moment, their faces were close enough for her to see the flecks of gray in his eyes. Neither moved. The wind pressed around them, carrying the scent of rain and earth, and something new that neither dared to name. She pulled back first. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but thin. He nodded once, eyes unreadable. "You've done more for this place than I could alone." Later, when the rain began, they took shelter in the barn. The roof leaked in thin silver lines. Thomas sat on a hay bale, rubbing mud from his hands, while Mary watched the water fall through the beams. "You think it's wrong?" she asked suddenly. He glanced up. "What's that?" "To start again. After everything." He was quiet for a long time. "The earth don't ask permission to bloom again," he said finally. "It just does." She wanted to believe him, but guilt was a stubborn root. Still that night, as the rain drummed steady on the roof, she dreamed not of graves but of open fields. Weeks passed. The crops began to take hold. The cattle fattened. Mary found herself laughing more easily, her body remembering lightness it had forgotten. Thomas built a small pen near the house so the youngest could play safely. Clara, quick to notice what others missed, began to watch her mother with knowing eyes. "Ma," she said one morning, helping with laundry, "Mr. Hale's a good man?" Mary smiled faintly. "He's been kind. He looks at you different," Clara said, her tone both curious and protective. "Like he's waiting for something." Mary wrung out a sheet, water dripping from her hands like silver threads. "Some things are better left waiting." But that evening, when Thomas came in from the fields, tired and dusted with sunlight, she felt her pulse answer in ways words could not quiet. Then came the letter. A rider from town brought it, a creased envelope bearing her husband's name in faded ink. It had been sent months ago, delayed by weather and the chaos of the frontier. Inside, in a scrawled hand, was a message from her husband's brother, written before news of the death had reached him. "If you and the children will come, the ranch is yours to share. There's work enough for all, and we'll see you fed. The Lord don't forsake the patient." Mary read it twice, the words blurring until they were little more than ghosts. Thomas waited by the doorway. "Good news?" She folded the letter slowly, as if it might break. "It's a chance. My husband's kin back east. They want us to come." He said nothing, only nodded, the muscle in his jaw tightening. That night, Mary sat awake long after the children had gone to bed, staring at the letter by lamplight. It offered safety, familiarity, the life she had once prayed for. But when she imagined leaving the wide sky, the sound of cattle, the steady rhythm of Thomas's voice, her chest ached in ways safety could not mend. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, patient, waiting. The letter lay folded on the table for 3 days. Each morning, Mary told herself she would decide by sundown, by supper, by the next sunrise. Yet the paper stayed where it was, its edges curling like something slowly surrendering to time. The children grew restless with her silence, sensing a change they could not name. Thomas said nothing at all. He worked longer hours, rode out farther across the pastures, as though the answer might be buried somewhere in the land itself. On the 4th morning, she found him in the barn, oiling the saddle. The smell of leather and smoke hung heavy in the air. He did not look up when she entered. "I thought you'd be gone by now," he said quietly. "I almost was." Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "I packed a sack, then I unpacked it again." He gave a faint, dry laugh. "That's more than most folks do before a choice." She moved closer, her boots crunching on the straw. "You think I should go?" He wiped his hands on a rag, finally meeting her eyes. "A man's kin can offer a roof, food, a name that means something again. That's not small. And what would you offer?" The question left her before she could stop it, soft but sharp as glass. He blinked, surprised not by the words, but by her courage in asking them. "I can offer work," he said slowly, "and quiet, and maybe peace, if you'd want it." Her throat tightened. "Peace ain't love." "No," he said, "but it's where love learns to live." The air between them pulsed with something unsaid. She reached for the saddle, running her fingers along the worn leather. "My husband was a good man," she murmured. "I don't doubt it. He built everything we had with his hands, but when he died, it all turned to dust." Thomas nodded. "The wind don't care how strong a man's grip is." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a mix of grief and defiance. "I'm tired of losing what I love." "Then don't run from what's still standing," he said. Outside, the day had turned soft and gold. The prairie shimmered in new grass, and the river that had slept under ice began to sing again. The world was remaking itself. She felt that truth in her chest, painful and luminous. That evening, as the sun sank, Thomas sat by the porch sharpening his knife, though there was nothing left to cut. The children played in the yard, their laughter ringing like bells through the dusk. Mary came out carrying the letter. "I've decided," she said. He set the knife down, his face unreadable. "East, then?" She shook her head. "Home's here now." For a long time he said nothing. Then he stood, the motion slow, reverent. "You sure?" "I've been sure before," she said. "This time I just mean it." He looked at her the way a man looks at rain after too long a drought, not with greed, but with disbelief that the world can still be kind. "Then I reckon we'll see what grows," he said softly. Weeks passed into months. Together they rebuilt what the winter had taken. The fields greened under their hands. The house filled with sound, hammering, laughter, the squeal of a child chasing a dog through dust. When storms came, they faced them side by side, mending what broke. There was no grand declaration, no ceremony. Love, when it arrived, did so quietly between shared labor, between breaths. One evening, late in summer, Thomas came in from the fields with a small wooden box. Inside was a simple band of silver, worn smooth with age. "It was my mother's," he said. "I kept it all these years, waiting on the right reason." Mary's hand trembled as she took it. The ring was imperfect, slightly bent, the way real things always are. "Are you asking me to marry you, Thomas Hale?" He smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. "I'm asking if you'll stay not because you have to, but because you want to." Her answer was quiet, almost lost to the wind. "I already have." He slipped the ring onto her finger. Outside, the sky burned with the last light of day, and the smell of hay and warm earth rose around them. The children shouted somewhere near the barn, chasing the fading Sunday. Later, when the stars came out, they sat together on the porch. The land stretched endless before them, vast and forgiving. Mary leaned against him, feeling the slow rhythm of his breathing, the steady beat of something that might finally be peace. Beyond the horizon, a coyote called, a sound both lonely and alive. The wind carried it over the grass, over the graves, over the miles that had once kept her heart divided. She closed her eyes, and the world felt whole again.